4:22 p.m., September 12, 2008. A routine Friday afternoon in Los Angeles. Hundreds of commuters boarded their usual train, expecting nothing more than a routine ride home. Among them was Jennifer, texting her husband she would be home for dinner soon. But 900 feet ahead, another person was also texting. Robert Sanchez, the train engineer, had just hit send on his 45th message that day. In the next 22 seconds, two massive trains weighing over 2 million pounds together were speeding toward each other. Neither crew had any idea what was about to happen. What happened next would not only claim 25 lives, but would completely transform rail safety in America forever. This is the story of one of the deadliest collisions in Metrolink's history, the Chatsworth Collision. Chatsworth is a quiet suburban neighborhood in California, home to just over 50,000 people as of 2020. It's located about 26 miles northwest of downtown Los Angeles and 39 miles east of Ventura. Chatsworth is linked to the USA's railway network through the Chatsworth Transportation Center, a busy train station that serves both Amtrak and Metrolink commuter trains. The station is part of Metrolink's Ventura County line, a 71-mile route connecting Los Angeles Union Station in the southeast to East Ventura in the northwest. North of the station, the tracks run side by side through Chatsworth before merging into a single track. As the line leaves the neighborhood, it makes two sharp turns, letting trains turn almost 180 degrees to follow the route of the nearby Ronald Reagan Freeway. LOF 65-12 was a Union Pacific freight train traveling south from Oxnard, heading back to Gemco after servicing local industries earlier in the day. The train was powered by two powerful EMD-SD-70 ACE locomotives and was made up of 17 freight cars. These locomotives, built since 2004, are massive six-axle diesel-electric engines. Each locomotive weighs 185 metric tons and stretches 73 feet long, with a power rating of 4,500 horsepower. The train was operated by a three-person crew, a driver or engineer, conductor, and brakeman. The second train, Metrolink Train 111, was a regional passenger service running from Los Angeles Union Station to East Ventura. On board were two crew members, an engineer and a conductor, and 222 passengers. The train consisted of two Bombardier bi-level passenger cars from 2001. Each car is 85 feet long and weighs 50 metric tons when empty. In this setup, each car can seat 143 passengers, while the control car seats one less, 142. Built for higher capacity, each car can hold up to 360 passengers if standing space is included. At the time of the accident, Metrolink Train 111 was being pulled by an EMD F59PH, a four-axle diesel-electric locomotive first introduced in 1992. The F59PH weighs 117 metric tons and is 58 feet long with a power output of 3,000 horsepower. At 3:13 p.m. on September 12, 2008, the LOF 65-12, also known as the Leesdale Local, left Oxnard heading for Gemco. The train's driver and conductor were in the leading locomotive, while the brakeman was positioned in the second locomotive, between the cars and the lead engine. 3:35 p.m., 21 minutes later, Metrolink 111 departed from Los Angeles Union Station, right on schedule. In the front cab sits Robert Sanchez, a 46-year-old engineer. Behind him, spread across three cars, 222 passengers settle in for their evening commute. At this point, Sanchez, the Metrolink engineer, had already exchanged a few text messages with someone, a local railroad enthusiast, as later revealed. Earlier that morning, Robert Sanchez's phone had barely stopped buzzing. 45 text messages in just 3 hours, about one every 4 minutes, all while driving a large commuter train full of passengers. The shocking truth? In 2008, there was no law against this. Train engineers could legally text while controlling these massive machines. After a fatal accident in 2003, the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) recommended that the Federal Railroad Administration rethink its rules on cell phone use by train crews. However, the only change was that crews were advised to assess the importance of calls or texts and stay focused on their main job, driving the train. But Sanchez's text that day? Casual chats with a train enthusiast. Nothing urgent. Nothing important. Nothing worth risking lives for. At 4:20 p.m., Metrolink train 111 began departing Chatsworth Station, running under a yellow signal, indicating an approach caution. This meant the train had a speed limit of 40 miles per hour, which had to be maintained until the next signal was clearly visible. According to protocol, both the conductor and the engineer are supposed to call out signals to each other. However, the conductor later stated that the last signal he heard Engineer Sanchez call out was 2 signals before they reached Chatsworth. At 4:20 p.m., Sanchez sounded the locomotive horn for 11 seconds as he crossed a level crossing. Just 1 second after the horn went silent, Sanchez received a 7th text message from the railroad enthusiast. Within a minute, the speed of Metrolink train 111 increased to 52 miles per hour as it crossed another level crossing, with both the horn and bell sounding. At 4:21:56 p.m., the train ran past a red signal marking the end of the double-track section, still traveling at 44 miles per hour. 4 seconds later, Sanchez released the brakes completely, though it's unclear why he had slowed down slightly before doing so. Just a second after that, Verizon logged Sanchez sending his 6th text message of the shift. At this point, Metrolink train 111 entered the single-track section without authorization, causing damage to the local set of points which had been set for the oncoming freight train. Meanwhile, the freight train was approaching the double-track section, expecting to move into a siding ahead of the waiting Metrolink train. At around 4:22:16 p.m., the freight train exited the last tunnel, traveling at 40 miles per hour, and entered a gentle 6-degree right-hand curve. At that moment, the Metrolink train came into view, heading straight toward the oncoming freight train. At this point, a collision was unavoidable. In a desperate attempt to reduce the impact, the crew aboard the freight train triggered an emergency stop, fully aware that it wouldn't be enough to stop their train, let alone the Metrolink train. At 4:22:23 p.m., 22 seconds after Sanchez sent his last text message, the 2 trains collided head-on, just 634 feet outside Tunnel 28. Neither train had slowed down. The Metrolink data logger even showed that the throttle hadn't been pulled back, and no emergency stop had been initiated. The trains crashed at a combined speed of 84 miles per hour. The lead locomotive of the freight train derailed and toppled over, pushing the Metrolink locomotive backwards. While the freight train's locomotive suffered extensive damage at the front, the driver's cabin remained intact. The second locomotive on the freight train stayed upright but derailed, with the freight cars piling up behind it. The front section of the Metrolink train was crushed by the freight train's locomotive, killing the engineer on impact. The freight locomotive then pushed into the leading passenger car, partially crushing it and causing it to fall onto its side. The train came to a stop, compressed by 16 feet. During the collision, the fuel tank of the Metrolink locomotive was torn off, starting a small fire. Thankfully, the fire didn't reach the passenger cars or spread to the freight train. Sadly, 25 people lost their lives in the crash, and another 135 were injured, with 28 of them suffering severe injuries. At 4:23 p.m., the first emergency call reporting the collision came in from a local resident, quickly followed by numerous calls from both residents and survivors. Initially, responders were sent to a nearby road, but as more information came in, they were able to redirect to the actual crash site. To gain better access to the wreckage, the fence of a nearby school was cut open. Over 1,000 responders joined the rescue and recovery effort, including 28 federal ambulances, 5 rescue helicopters, and many private ambulances. One of the first fire crews to arrive immediately began fighting the diesel fire burning near the cab of the leading freight locomotive. As they worked, they heard banging from inside the cab. Despite their attempts to break the windshield, they eventually cut through the rubber molding of one of the windshields, entered the smoke-filled cab, and rescued the severely injured driver. The co-worker in the rear locomotive, despite suffering severe back injuries, managed to climb out of the wreckage on his own. Meanwhile, responders formed a chain and carefully cut through the wreckage of the leading passenger car, passing debris down the line as they worked their way through to rescue or recover passengers. Within 3.5 hours, the leading car was cleared of both survivors and victims. As the rescue effort continued, psychologists and chaplains arrived on site to support both survivors and responders. Helicopters were also deployed to scan the surrounding undeveloped land, ensuring that no survivors had wandered off in a state of shock. The devastation was immense. Half of the leading passenger car was completely destroyed in the crash. Most of the fatalities among the passengers occurred in this car, with only one passenger from the second car, which remained structurally intact, suffering injuries that they would later succumb to. The head firefighter at the scene described the wreckage as the worst his team had ever encountered. Surviving passengers later spoke to the media, describing the interior of the train, especially the forward two cars, as a chaotic, blood-stained mess. To help identify the victims, the LA County coroner set up an air-conditioned tent near the wreckage, effectively turning it into an on-site morgue. The recovery effort continued through the night, with the final victims recovered and identified by 2:30 p.m. On September 13th, roughly 22 hours after the collision. At that point, the site was officially handed over to the investigators, and the rescue personnel began to withdraw. The investigators faced the challenging task of figuring out how two trains ended up colliding on a single track, and what caused such a massive tragedy. One critical factor soon came to light. The section of track where the accident occurred was not equipped with PTC, positive train control, a safety system designed to keep trains at a safe distance from each other. While the lack of PTC didn't directly cause either train to enter the single-track section without authorization, it meant that there was nothing other than the crew's alertness to prevent the collision. Metrolink spokeswoman Ms. Terrell stated, "We believe it was our engineer who failed to stop at the signal." She openly admitted that if the company's engineer had followed the signal, the collision could have been prevented. However, her comments quickly drew criticism. Mr. Kanabe, a Metrolink board member and Los Angeles County supervisor, stepped in, arguing that it was too early to place blame on the deceased engineer. He suggested that a malfunction, such as a signal showing green on both sides of the single track, could have played a role. 2 days later, Terrell was asked to resign. Following a board meeting where her handling of the situation was harshly criticized, it was concluded that it was wrong to make such a premature statement, even though she had been instructed to do so. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a signaling malfunction, confirming that one of the trains had indeed run a red signal. The driver of the freight train was able to confirm that he had not passed a red signal, a claim supported by a surveillance camera fitted to his locomotive. So, it turned out that Miss Terrell had been correct. The driver of the Metrolink train had indeed run a red signal, but the question remained, why? At this point, local TV station KCAL TV broke a shocking piece of news. They had found a 16-year-old local railway enthusiast who claimed to have exchanged text messages with the Metrolink driver, Robert Sanchez, throughout the day. The teenager had the full backlog of messages sent and received, proving the exchange. He revealed that Sanchez had been texting him all day, but the messages had suddenly stopped. When the teenager saw the wreckage on the news later, he realized why Sanchez had stopped responding. The NTSB's investigators began to comb through the wreckage of the locomotive, hoping to find clues. However, they were unable to recover Sanchez's cell phone from the wreck. They were forced to subpoena Verizon for the records, which revealed a series of text messages sent by Sanchez up until just 22 seconds before the collision. Upon further investigation into Sanchez's phone usage and connections to the enthusiast community, disturbing details emerged. It was revealed that just days before the crash, Sanchez had allowed a railway enthusiast to ride in the cab of the locomotive, an action that violated both company protocol and laws. He had even planned to let the enthusiast co-pilot the train for 4 stations later in the day, telling him, "I'm going to do all the radio talking. You're going to run the locomotive and I'm going to tell you how to do it." Additionally, Sanchez had already received 2 prior warnings about excessive phone usage while on duty. With these findings, the official cause of the crash was determined to be inattentional blindness. This is when a person is so focused on something like texting that they fail to notice important signals, much like how drivers sometimes run red lights. convinced the light was green because their brain had decided it should have been. In this case, Sanchez's focus on his phone led him to overlook the red signal, with disastrous consequences. Another critical factor in the collision was the behavior of the conductor in the moments leading up to the crash. Typically, when the engineer is alone in the locomotive, it's mandatory for the engineer to call out signals for confirmation to the conductor. If these signals are not called out, the conductor is expected to assume the engineer has become incapacitated and initiate an emergency stop. However, records from the Metrolink train show that Sanchez failed to call out the last two signals. Despite this, the conductor did not take the necessary action to stop the train. Instead, the conductor made an unusual report. He told Sanchez that the starting signal at Chatsworth station was green, rather than following the usual procedure of reporting each signal's color in sequence. This failure to follow protocol allowed the train to continue, leading to the devastating collision that followed. Just a week after the crash, the California Public Utilities Commission passed an emergency order banning cell phone usage by train crews. This decision also led to broader changes, with California passing a law later that year banning texting while driving, which came into effect by 2009. Following the accident, a wave of lawsuits was filed against Metrolink, but a liability law introduced in 1997 limited claims to a total of $200 million. This cap sparked significant criticism from Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Peter Lichtman, who argued that the law left survivors and victims' families undercompensated by at least $64 million. While important reforms followed, including stricter laws and the implementation of positive train control, the lives lost and the devastation left behind cannot be undone. Was this disaster entirely avoidable? Could better communication, more rigorous adherence to rules, and a greater focus on safety have prevented this loss of life? Share your thoughts in the comments below.